I did my disease project on Zika virus disease. Zika virus disease, or ZVD, is caused by Zika virus, which is part of the Flaviviridae family. Zika virus is also an arbovirus, meaning that it is spread between susceptible vertebrate hosts by blood-feeding arthropods, in this case mosquitoes. The Flaviviridae family consists of positive single-stranded RNA viruses. In addition to Zika virus, this family includes dengue, West Nile, yellow fever, tick-borne encephalitis, and Japanese encephalitis. And Zika virus is antigenically and structurally similar to these viruses. The spherical virion is made up of different proteins, 3 of which are structural and make up the capsid, membrane, and envelope. The envelope has a class 2 viral membrane fusion protein, which has an elongated 3-domain structure. The structural proteins direct several critical steps in the life cycle of Zika virus, like assisting in its ability to attach and enter a cell, membrane fusion, and virus assembly. Zika virus particles also have lipid envelopes and RNA with positive polarity, and as you can see in the image provided, the different components of the virus particle, and each is presented in a different color. The life cycle of Zika virus. Typically through mosquito bites, Zika virus enters the human body. As I mentioned earlier, the virus particles have proteins on their outer envelopes that assist in their ability to enter host cells. These specific proteins interact with receptor proteins of the host cells and sort of trick the cell into allowing the viral particles in. After the viral particle has entered the host cell, the RNA genome of the Zika virus is released into the cytoplasm of the cell, where it is translated into a protein by enzymes. The protein then splits into many smaller proteins. Some of these smaller proteins become structural components that are needed to make new viral particles, while others copy and process the RNA genome. Then these viral proteins and copies of the RNA genome meet at the surface of the endoplasmic reticulum, or the ER, and new viral particles bud off into the ER, and when they do this, they take some of the ER's membrane, which then forms the viral envelope. These new viral particles travel through the Golgi apparatus for further processing before they are released at the cell surface. And now they are free to infect other cells, which continues the infection cycle. Zika virus was first isolated from monkeys living in the Zika forest in Uganda in 1947, but the first reported human case wasn't until 1954. Since then, there were a few cases reported in Africa and Asia in the 1960s, but because there weren't any serious health issues noted, the Zika virus disease was classified as benign and sporadic. The first documented outbreak occurred on Yap Island in Micronesia in 2007, and 70% of the population actually, 70% of the population above age 3 were actually infected. Again, there weren't any serious health complications or hospitalizations documented, so it wasn't until the outbreak in French Polynesia when that people noticed that it was a little more serious than that. So in French Polynesia in 2013 and 14, it was noticed that there was an increase in frequency of neurological disorders and nervous system and brain abnormalities. In 2015, the first cases in Americans was reported in Brazil, and during this time there were many cases reported in South and Central America. Zika virus is transmitted by mosquitoes in the Aedes genus. In the U.S., the Aedes aegypti mosquitoes are restricted to the deep south along the U.S.-Mexican border to Southern California, and these mosquitoes are considered the main vector for the Zika virus disease. The Aedes pictus mosquitoes are the secondary vector of this disease in the tropics. Zika virus can spread to a fetus from an infected mother, which results in congenital Zika syndrome, which I'll touch on in a minute. There are other modes of transmission, though they're less common. So Zika virus can spread via sexual intercourse. Zika virus in semen and vaginal secretions actually persists longer than in other bodily fluids. Blood transfusions and organ or tissue transplantations can spread this virus if the donors are infected. Infected mothers can also spread Zika virus to their breastfeeding infants through breast milk. However, because of the benefits of breast milk, the CDC still encourages breastfeeding in areas of ongoing Zika virus unless mothers have tested positive. This is just a diagram that shows how Zika virus has spread from monkeys in Uganda to the human population, and as you can see, the mosquitoes have played a very vital role in this spread. The signs and symptoms of Zika virus disease. So symptoms are mild and only affect 20% of those that are infected. And some of these common symptoms include fever, headache, muscle and joint pain, malaise, skin rash, and conjunctivitis. And these symptoms typically last 4 to 7 days. Most people don't even become ill enough to be hospitalized and don't know that they're infected with Zika virus. Some rare adverse effects include encephalopathy in adults, Guillain-Barré syndrome, and death. In infants, microcephaly is one of the major effects of this disease. And microcephaly is when the infant's head is significantly smaller than normal due to abnormal brain development. Infants also can portray congenital Zika syndrome, as I mentioned earlier, which includes a group of developmental impairments like eye abnormalities, ocular lesions, congenital contractures, and neurodevelopmental delay is common. Infants born without congenital Zika syndrome are still at risk for neurodevelopmental delay. Microcephaly. I wanted to focus a little bit more on this because, as I mentioned, it was one of the more serious, long-lasting effects of Zika virus. So Zika virus triggers stress in the endoplasmic reticulum, and in the ER, some cellular proteins and lipids are synthesized in the embryonic brain. So this has a huge effect on the development of the fetal brain. So the virus reaches the brain and infects the neuronal stem cells, which causes fewer neurons generated and chronic stress on the ER, and so apoptosis is promoted, and apoptosis is early cell death. So when the cerebral cortex is infected, it becomes deficient in neurons, and the brain is underdeveloped and smaller in size. Zika virus disease is suspected on symptoms and the places and dates a person has traveled, but diagnosis requires lab confirmation. And there are actually a few tests that can be done. The enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay detects virus-specific immunoglobulin M and neutralizing antibodies, but cross-reaction with related flaviviruses is common. In the plaque reduction neutralization test, the virus-specific neutralizing antibodies are also detected, but in this test, there's differentiation among the antibodies from closely related flaviviruses. And the reverse transcriptase polymerase chain reaction, viral RNA is detected in serum or urine, and with the serum test, the Zika virus can be detected during the first week of symptom onset. And with urine, the samples have to be collected less than 14 days after symptom onset to be accurate. The CDC recommends serologic testing for all pregnant women returning from areas with ongoing Zika virus infection, and ultrasonography is done to assess fetal anatomy. Infants born to mothers infected while pregnant. So if the mother tests negative and there's no microcephaly present, the infant receives routine care. But if the mother tests positive or inconclusive, the infant is tested whether or not microcephaly is present. In 2016, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases began human testing of a DNA vaccine for Zika virus, but currently there's not an antiviral or vaccine available to treat Zika virus disease, so treatment is just supportive. It is recommended that infected individuals rest, take in plenty of fluids to prevent dehydration, and take acetaminophen for any pain or fever. It is advised that NSAIDs not be taken until dengue is ruled out because hemorrhage is a risk. And also death due to Zika virus disease is related to immune thrombocytopenia and bleeding. So acetaminophen is the way to go for any pain or fever. In pregnant women, serial ultrasonography is done to monitor the anatomy and growth of the fetus. And these mothers are referred to maternal fetal medicine or infectious disease specialists. And all infants born to infected mothers should be monitored for at least 2 years whether or not they have signs of congenital Zika syndrome. The best way to prevent getting Zika virus disease is to avoid mosquito bites altogether. And to do this, you can treat your clothing and gear with permethrin insecticide, wear long sleeves and pants, stay in air-conditioned buildings with windows, with proper window and door screens. And if that's not available, to use mosquito nets. Insect repellents with DEET is very important, as the one pictured here. It's important to avoid unprotected sex with partners at risk of having Zika virus infection, and to avoid travel in areas with ongoing Zika virus transmission. Currently, there are field testing methods to control the Aedes mosquitoes. They've released genetically altered males, which are meant to mate with wild females, and their larval offspring that's produced do not mature, so they cannot spread the disease or the virus. There have also been sterilized males released, which are meant to also mate with the wild females, but the eggs are infertile, so again, they do not live and mature, or they do not mature into adult mosquitoes that can transmit the virus. They've also infected mosquitoes with the Wolbachia bacteria, which blocks susceptibility of female mosquitoes' gut to the Zika virus. I have included references used in this presentation, as well as image references.